This story is related to the spectral noose of Kitchen Village and the cursed phone call that started a nightmare. The thin line between life and death is often held together by nothing more than a fragile thread, or in some cases, a coiled rope. People often scoff at the idea of the supernatural, claiming that ghosts are mere figments of a guilty conscience or a tired mind. But for those of us who have lived through the darkness of Kitchen Village, the truth is far more suffocating. This is a record of a series of chilling, real-life events, a tragedy that began with a phone call and ended in a wave of terror that nearly claimed my entire circle of friends. It all began with a young man named Ghulam. He was newly married, with his life stretched out before him like an unwritten book. But Ghulam carried a volatile temper, made worse by the burning sting of alcohol. One fateful night, Ghulam was alone in his room, the door locked against the world. He was on his mobile phone, engaged in a bitter screaming match with his wife. The argument reached a breaking point, a fever pitch of resentment and drunken impulsiveness. As the voice on the other end of the line cried out in anger, Ghulam decided to silence his own world. He constructed a makeshift noose, stepped onto a stool, and let the darkness take him. When the villagers finally broke down the door, they were met with a sight that defied common sense. Ghulam was hanging from the ceiling, but his feet were dangling mere inches from the floor. He was a tall man. Had he simply straightened his legs or reached out, he could have saved himself. It looked as though he had chosen to die in a position where survival was physically possible, yet something unseen had held his body in place. The village whispered in hushed, fearful tones. They said that a shadow had stood behind him, pulling his legs down to ensure the breath left his body. After the rituals of death were completed, Ghulam's wife, haunted by the memory of that final hateful phone call, packed her things and fled the village. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Ghulam had not found peace. His spirit seemed trapped in the cellular waves and the rafters of our homes. The friends who had once laughed with him now began to experience a shared, chilling phenomenon. 10 days after the funeral, the first echo struck. One of Ghulam's closest friends, a man with a stable life and no history of depression, was found by his family in the dead of night. He was standing on a chair, a rope already around his neck, staring blankly at the wall. When they pulled him down, he woke up as if from a deep hypnotic trance. He shook with a terrifying coldness, whispering that he remembered nothing, only a rhythmic, melodic humming in his ear that commanded him to climb higher.
The horror soon reached my own doorstep. I was part of this tight-knit group of friends. Although I lived a bit away, my maternal grandmother's house was in Kitchen, and I spent my days working there with my cousins and Ghulam's old crew. My maternal uncle's son was especially close to the deceased. The night the curse came for us, the atmosphere was heavy, as if the air itself had turned into lead. We were staying together, preparing to leave the village for work the next morning. Among us was Dildar, a man known for his frequent, petty bickering with his wife. That evening, a strange electrical storm seemed to grip the house. The light bulbs were not merely flickering, they were shivering, emitting a dim, sickly yellow glow that made the shadows on the walls look like reaching hands. Dildar had been arguing with his wife over a trivial matter. In a burst of familiar drama, he shouted that he would end his life and stormed into a private room, slamming the door. His wife, weary of his constant threats, ignored him and went to a different part of the house to eat her meal. Dildar's brother and the rest of us were busy packing. The brother turned to me and said, "I'm heading out to get things ready. Follow me in a few minutes." I nodded, but as I stood there, a sudden piercing chill surged through my spine. Dildar's wife approached me, her face pale in the dying light. "Paya, he's in there saying those things again. And the lights, look at the lights. Something feels wrong." I tried to act brave. "It's just his usual drama, Bobby, don't worry." But the moment the words left my lips, my heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped animal. A wave of inexplicable nausea washed over me. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run toward that room. The air felt thin, and the silence from behind Dildar's door was absolute and terrifying. I turned to another brother nearby. "Go and check on him. My heart is racing. I have a bad feeling." He shrugged it off. "Let it be. He does this every day. He's just seeking attention." He refused to move, but the pressure in my chest became unbearable. It was as if a physical weight was pushing me toward the door. I couldn't ignore the dread any longer. I walked toward the room, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The dim bulb in the hallway was pulsating like a failing heart. I pushed the door open and peered into the gloom. My soul shivered. There, suspended in the center of the room, Dildar was hanging. His body was twisting slowly in the air. I didn't just see him, I felt the presence of something else in that room, a cold, stagnant vacuum of energy. I let out a jagged, horrifying scream and stumbled back, grabbing the other brother by his shirt. "He's done it! He's actually hanging! Get in there!"
We rushed to the room. In the flickering, weak light, we struggled to lift his weight. I was so consumed by terror that my limbs felt like water. I didn't have the strength to act alone. Together, we managed to cut the rope and lower his limp body to the floor. He was blue, his tongue protruding, his eyes rolled back into a terrifying white stare. He wasn't breathing. The house erupted into wails of grief. We began to desperately massage his throat and chest, praying to any god that would listen. Suddenly, a horrific, wet, rasping sound came from his throat. A tiny spark of life remained. Kitchen was a remote village, and at that hour, there were no vehicles to be found. In a frenzy of desperation, we laid Dildar's unconscious body on a hand-pulled cart, Theli. A man named Lal Bahadur stepped up, and together we pushed that cart through the pitch-black, uneven roads, our breath coming in ragged gasps. Every shadow seemed to reach for us, as if Ghulam's spirit was trying to pull the cart back into the darkness. We reached the hospital just as his pulse was flatlining. The doctors rushed him into emergency care. I stood in the hallway, my hands stained with the dust of the road and the sweat of fear. Hours later, the doctor emerged. He looked at us with a grim expression and said, "If you had been even 30 seconds later, just half a minute, there would have been no saving him. You brought him back from the very edge of the grave." The weight of those words stayed with me. If I had listened to the others, if I had left for work just a minute earlier, Dildar would be dead. But the horror didn't end with his recovery. Over the next month, we heard similar stories from our other friends who had moved to different towns. Sudden urges to find a rope, the sound of Ghulam's voice on the phone when no one was calling, and the sight of shadows standing in the corners of their rooms. I eventually fled Kitchen, unable to bear the weight of the air there. I moved to a place where the lights don't flicker and the shadows stay where they belong. Things have been quiet for me lately, but I know the truth. Ghulam's death wasn't an end. It was a beckoning. The noose is still there, invisible and waiting, hanging over the heads of those he left behind.
If you ever find yourself in a heated argument on the phone and the lights begin to shiver, look up. You might find that you aren't as alone as you think.